When Hillary Clinton won the Democratic Party nomination in 2016, her presidency seemed almost inevitable.
I may become the first woman president, but one of you is next.
The campaign was ugly, and an FBI investigation into her use of a private email server while Secretary of State loomed over every moment.
Hillary Clinton has to go to jail, okay? She has to go to jail.
It's crooked Hillary Clinton. Oh, she's as crooked as they come, folks.
If I win, I am going to instruct my Attorney General to get a special prosecutor to look into your situation.
The President-elect of the United States of America, Donald Trump.
I love this country. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Some people are in tears. There's just a sense of pervasive shock.
This is painful, and it will be for a long time.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
The notion that we had an impact on the election makes me sick to my stomach.
Hillary Clinton's not yet formally released memoir making headlines.
I think we've all seen this, where she struggles sometimes to take responsibility.
Scandal and chaos has plagued the Trump administration.
What we have here now is a White House in a crisis of credibility.
Hillary Clinton is refusing to fade into the background. Secretary Clinton, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You've been a lawyer, a First Lady, Senator, Secretary of State, presidential candidate. What's on your business card now?
Activist. Citizen activist. I really feel that at this point, at least in my country, but I think it's broader than that, being involved, speaking out, caring about what goes on is something that we should all do more of.
You've now had 18 months of watching the Trump White House. Do you feel better or worse with each day that passes from election night?
I get more concerned every day because there doesn't seem to be, much of a coherent plan. That what the president and his administration do on a day-to-day basis. It's hard to follow and figure out where it's leading. There's a lot of misdirection, a lot of contradiction. I think it's not only troubling within our own country, but it also undermines America's leadership around the world. And so I care about it both domestically and internationally.
I want to ask, firstly, just because a couple of weeks ago, coincidentally, we had the former FBI Director James Comey on this program, so I want to put to you some of what he said so our audience can hear your response. I asked him about the reopening of the investigation into your emails 11 days before the US election, something that you write about in your book, What Happened. You believe it contributed significantly to your election loss. Mr. Comey said that in no way was his decision-making political, that he was simply concerned about transparency and the reputation of the FBI. What do you say to that?
That's hard to square with the failure of either he or the FBI to disclose to people that there was an active investigation going on about potential Russian interference in our presidential election and the potential involvement or at least association in some way by supporters of then Mr. Trump. So I've never understood that. I try to keep two things in my mind, Leigh, at the same time. I don't know why he treated me the way he did, and none of his explanations, frankly, hold water. And there's been a lot of criticism from other prosecutors and other government officials who point out that what he did was unprecedented, both in July and in October. But there's also contemporaneous evidence of his interactions with Donald Trump after the election that are of importance in the ongoing investigation. So, I don't understand why he did what he did in 2016, but I will, continue to follow what goes on in the investigation of which he is now a part.
But then if you have concerns about how he acted in 2016, how can the public have confidence in terms of his motivations or what he says about what occurred in his meetings with Donald Trump?
Well, people have to sort that out, starting with the special counsel. And his very experienced team of lawyers and investigators. They'll have to figure that out. But I do think that two things can be simultaneously accurate. One, that his explanations as to how he treated me have never truly added up. And two, that he told people at the time, after his several encounters with then Mr. Trump and then President Trump, about what was being said to him, and had contemporaneous memos to that effect. There is no evidence as to why he did what he did to me. There's nobody who's come forward who has said, well, he said this, that, and the other. It's not clear at all. So I do think that you can have one opinion about what he did with respect to me and another about what he has said concerning his interactions with Trump.
He said, when put to him, what you say about there being a double standard in the public revelations about your email investigation, but the secrecy around the Russia investigation, his argument was that the Russia matter was just in its early stages and not much was known about whether there was any substance to it, whereas it was already publicly known that your emails were the subject of investigation. What's your response to that?
Well, first, on October 7th, the head of the CIA and the director of national intelligence did warn that there was concern about Russian interference in the election. He refused to join that public disclosure. Now, it was lost in the aftermath of the Hollywood Access tape and the dumping of the Russian stolen emails. So he was on notice starting from the end of the summer by a number of people that perhaps there should be some disclosure, which he resisted. And then when the other two high intelligence officials made their comment, he refused to go along. So, look, he has said what he has said. I don't find it convincing. I have laid out in, I think, very persuasive evidence that his intervention on October the 28th was the most important reason why I ended up losing 11 days later.
On the matter of Trump's possible collusion with Russia, we learned this week that the Mueller inquiry is investigating the payment of hundreds of thousands of dollars by a company linked to a Russian oligarch to Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. We also know by now that 19 people, 4 of whom are former Trump staffers, have been indicted by the special counsel. Where is this all going to end?
We don't know yet, and I would not comment on what is an ongoing investigation at this point. I have no more information than any person who follows the news. We don't know. There is certainly a lot of smoke. How much fire it turns out to be, we'll find out when the investigation is completed.
The day before James Comey announced he was reopening the investigation into your emails, we now know that President Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, secretly paid a woman named Stormy Daniels $130,000 to keep quiet about an affair that she had had with Donald Trump. Do you think that that information would have made any difference to the election outcome had it emerged at the time?
Well, that's something else we'll never know. It's unfortunate that we don't. I mean, there were a lot of things that could have made a difference, that people might have thought twice about what they were voting for. And, unfortunately, we'll never know the answer to that.
Given that things like, say, the grab 'em by the pussy remark didn't make any difference, it is an open question whether anything else that went to moral or character would have made any impact, I guess.
I don't know. People often think money makes a difference. So if money's involved as opposed to just talking, that seems to carry more weight.
The United States has its next presidential election in 2020. If the next Democratic presidential candidate came to you and said, running against Donald Trump, and said, what mistakes should I avoid making based on your experience, based on the mistakes you made? What would you say?
Well, everybody runs their own campaign, and clearly run the best campaign you can. I'm proud of the campaign we ran, but what I was up against was unprecedented. I mean, it really was a perfect storm. So learn those lessons. Don't assume that what happened to me will only have happened to me. Be prepared for the reality that whether it's foreign interference or some other kind of new influence peddling through online influence, for example, take it seriously. And
But even knowing that, what would you have done differently?
oh my gosh, there was so much we didn't know, Leigh. I mean, the post-election analysis is fascinating and horrifying. So, for example, a recent academic study about why people who had voted for Obama once did not vote for me. And what they found was there were 3 major issues in this particular study that really influenced voters, and they were conveyed into people's Facebook feeds. So I was dying. That was one of the common attacks on me that were being perpetrated, that I was selling arms to ISIS, and that Pope Francis had endorsed Donald Trump. Now, the last one is laughable, except what these researchers found out is that people, low information voters, and so people who aren't following it closely, they open their Facebook page and there's a news report. And the news report is particularly targeted to them, maybe based on religion, maybe based on their own, political views. But they're being told that something happened that didn't happen, but they're not news consumers. And they get most of their news from Facebook, which is the major news outlet now in the United States.
But then does that mean you have to treat seriously something like that and say...
Yes. You know what? I never would have thought that before. Because there was primarily a system of news delivery that was visible. You might not have taken everything in it seriously, but you could see what was in the papers, you could hear what was on the radio, you could see what was on the television, and you could respond. And there was also labeled political advertising. So your opponents would put up an ad, and they would have to take responsibility for it. And so you could counter it. This was all under the radar. We had never seen anything like it. You do not have to tell who is paying. Facebook was accepting advertising in rubles. So did they tell anybody? We didn't know that. They didn't. The viewer didn't know that. So yeah, unfortunately, I would not let anything go unanswered, and I will tell whoever the next nominee that's how I believe they should respond.
Let me get your reflections on some issues as the former Secretary of State. President Trump has now announced a date for his meeting with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The South Korean president and the British foreign minister say if there is a breakthrough in peace between North and South Korea, that should make President Trump a contender for the Nobel Peace Prize. What do you think about how the Trump administration is handling that issue?
It's too soon to tell. Look, if there is a positive outcome that can be verified, particularly with respect to the North Korean nuclear program, that has built-in safeguards so that it is sustainable, not a one-off announcement at a summit, I will join in the applause, because that is something that will be good for the world if it can be brought about. But it's way too soon to tell. And even if there is some kind of an announcement coming out of such a meeting, you have to wait and see, because we've been down this road with the North before, where they've made promises, and then within a year or more, it's determined that they have broken those promises. So I think it's certainly hopeful, but I can't be either optimistic or pessimistic at this time.
On another matter, there's been an enormous focus on Russia's interference in the American election. I wanted to get your opinion on whether you think Australia should be concerned about any sort of similar risk from China.
Yes, my answer is yes. And that is not to argue that there be a confrontational relationship between Australia and China. Australia has a lot of interests with China. Certainly your economy is intertwined with China. But I do think that Australia, along with other liberal democracies around the world, have got to take the threat of foreign interference seriously, because I know from just reading that there have been instances of exposures concerning political efforts by Chinese interests through contributions and other influence efforts to really direct certain policy outcomes. Look, I think Australians need to be for Australians. Americans need to be for Americans. And whether it's Russia in a secret way interfering with our election and producing more than 3,500 ads to try to confuse our electorate, to try to damage me, or the Chinese looking to try to influence policy, we should say no. I don't care what side of the political aisle you might be on in either Australia or the United States. We have an interest in making sure that decisions that are made by our governments are not the result of some kind of influence peddling by a foreign power.
Somebody who has watched 30 plus years of your career would see extreme hours, high pressure, sexism, relentless public attacks, loss of privacy.
Ooh, sounds pretty horrible, doesn't
And
it?
then, well, and then, also at the end, a brutal exit.
Yes.
What would you say to people who look at your experience and go, well, it's not worth it going into public life?
Oh, it's absolutely worth it. I just wish that I had been, I had understood better what I needed to do to combat what was this unprecedented attack on me. I'm used to being attacked. That kind of goes with the territory.
There might be viewers watching it who say, well, she seems to be in denial because she's saying it's all external agents. What about her?
Oh, I write in my book, read my book, What Happened. I talk about the mistakes that I made, and I take responsibility for them, but I got 3 million more votes, and I got 3 million more votes because, in general, the American people actually agreed with my positions and what I intended to do as president. But in very targeted areas, and I write about in the book how messages were specifically targeted toward voters in the states that I ended up losing, that I thought I would win, that the intervention of Jim Comey at the end, something unprecedented and uncalled for, cost me a lot of points in places where I was leading until then. So yes, I take responsibility, and ultimately I was the name on the ballot, and so I'm responsible for the fact we didn't succeed.
Secretary Clinton, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
It's great to talk to you.